Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend today's afternoon webinar with Elections Canada. My name is Christopher Sutton, and I'm the National Executive Director of the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association. I would like to provide you a little bit of background before we jump into this webinar. This webinar is being recorded so that for future playback, and also so that you can watch it at your own leisure. If you have any questions during the webinar, please email events@chha.ca, or you can put them in the chat box below. All questions during our webinar today will be answered 5 to 10 minutes prior to the end of the session. I would like to provide you a bit of a background, and in addition to the upcoming election, the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association has entered into a partnership with Elections Canada entitled Inspired Democracy. This is a program aimed at reducing barriers to voting through civic engagement and information activities. This is nonpartisan, and the information we will be sharing the next few months will enable you as a citizen to be able to fully participate in the upcoming election, to be able to ask questions to candidates, and to be able to be fully participant in the election process. The Canadian Hard of Hearing Association will also be participating in several events with Elections Canada to ensure the voices of hard of hearing Canadians are heard during this time. We've been very active on the Accessibility Advisory Committee and other committees to ensure that your needs are understood and that they can be addressed. This project began in May when we were very fortunate to have Juan present 2 workshops at our conference that took place in Montreal. There will be another webinar in September and several written communications coming your way in the near future. Today, we're pleased to have Juan join us again to speak to you about employment during the federal election. We know this is an area that you're very interested in, and I know that you'll be very engaged in. Juan holds a PhD in political science from the University of Ottawa and has been working in the electoral administration since 2013. His thesis focused on political participation of ethnic minorities. As a part of his outreach and consultation work with Elections Canada, he is working to build partnerships with community organizations like our own in view of promoting an accessible, inclusive electoral framework that Canadians can trust and use. I'd like to welcome Juan, who will be presenting today's webinar. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to events@chha.ca or to put them in the chat box, and we'll address them at the end of our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for welcoming us today, and thank you very much for the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association. We're very pleased to be here. It's always a great opportunity when we get to talk to both electors and community organizations and at local, regional, and national levels about voting and about registration and about running an election and about working in an election, because all of those are key areas of electoral participation, and we want to make sure that people have the information that they need to be able to participate in those areas of elections. And so thank you very much once again for welcoming us, and let's begin today's presentation. First, I'll let you know about what it is that we do at Elections Canada during this time just before the election, and we'll talk in more depth about why working at a federal election is important. And I'll show you some of the tools that we've developed that can help you, that can guide you through your journey of working in an election. If you want to be involved in that way and you don't know where to start, hopefully the tools that I present to you today will help you. So some of the important information that we'll share is why would I want to work at a federal election? Who can work at a federal election? What kinds of jobs are available? And how do I apply? Okay, so first of all, before we jump into the information on working at an election, I would like to spend some time talking about Elections Canada. As Chris mentioned, Elections Canada is a federal agency that is responsible for running federal elections, by-elections, referendums. We are not the government. We're an independent, nonpartisan agent of Parliament, and that just means that we report to Parliament, and we don't report to the government of the day. Elections Canada has been mandated to run federal elections, by-elections, and referendums, and as part of our Inspire Democracy program, we want people to have the information they need, like I said, to learn about the electoral process, and then to be able to act, right? It's about knowing what the electoral process entails and how to get involved. And so our mission really is to ensure that Canadians have the information they need to exercise their democratic right to vote and be a candidate. But we know that not everyone has the same access to the democratic, to this democratic right. Some of you may have experienced or face difficulties in being able to participate fully in elections, and that's why Elections Canada is providing extra information to people so that you all can be engaged in the federal election. We have created tools like this workshop to share information with you. And we have come up with Inspire Democracy, as Chris mentioned, which is an outreach program to understand why some Canadians don't exercise their democratic right to electoral participation, and to identify and address informational barriers to participation. So we have noticed that groups of electors who face additional barriers include Indigenous electors, New Canadians, youth, student electors, and electors with disabilities of Canadians who continue to experience barriers to the voting process. And so I'm going over this information because it's important to note that this is an Elections Canada workshop, and it's important because when you're looking for information about elections, it's always a good idea to go to the authoritative source of information about the federal election, elections.ca. For any information that you need, go to them. Like Chris said, we also work with the CHHA to be able to share some of that official information. And they can certainly assist in that way as well, to the right information. So, like I said, we just want to make sure that barriers to electoral participation are addressed. One of the ways we do this is by working with organizations that help us to identify the barriers, and that's within their respective communities, and specifically barriers that are caused by lack of information. Some barriers we've identified through research include a lack of confidence in knowledge of elections and the electoral process. So not knowing how elections work and what's involved, what it is that you're voting for. Not knowing what you need to bring with you when you go vote. You know, that's tied to ID. Some people don't necessarily know what pieces of ID are necessary to vote. And in some cases, when you can't prove your ID, well, what mechanisms are there to help you vote regardless? And also, another barrier is about not being sure where, when, or the different ways to vote, and the different services that are available, and also about misconceptions about election jobs. You know, in this toolkit, what we'll see is that the types of positions that Elections Canada staffs are in fact paid. Some people think that they are actually being staffed by volunteers, which is not the case. So our job is to address those misconceptions as well. So thinking about the electoral process, it's a bit tricky to do an icebreaker via webinar, but I'll do it in a way that gets you thinking about the different ways that that you can be involved in the federal election. So have you registered to vote? Have you considered going through the online registration system? And just think about these questions, and you'll see why this is. I want to make sure that you think about this in a bit. Have you voted in a federal election? Have you voted in a referendum? Have any of you ran for a political party? Have any of you run as independents in an election? Have any of you worked as a poll clerk and are considering what else is out there? Have any of you actually been part of the Elections Canada team at one point or another? The reason I ask all these questions is because we've defined 3 ways, really, that you can be engaged in a federal election. You can either run in a federal election as a candidate or help somebody to run. You can work at a federal election, and of course, you can register and vote. So today we will talk about about working at a federal election, but I do want you to be aware that there are other ways, and if you're looking for information about those other ways to be involved in the election, give us a shout, talk to Chris, and we'll definitely point you in the right direction. But for now, we'll focus on working at a federal election. Okay, so working at a federal election is, we've developed a toolkit for that. Again, if you don't know where to start, if you want to know what kind of positions are available, if you want to know what kind of commitment is required from you, this toolkit is a good place to start. It presents information on working in an election. It's designed as questions and answers, and a lot of these questions will answer some of those, you might be wondering who can work, when and how do I apply, what commitment does it mean, and so on. So the toolkit is a really good place to start, and it'll point you to the different steps along the way. Like I said, it's presented as a roadmap. And when you go to the website, to inspiredemocracy.ca, what you'll notice is that you'll click under Act. And again, those are just the different ways that you can act within the election. So when you go on the website, you'll find a journey map for working at a federal election. It's a question and answer format. And it also has an information guide with more in-depth information about work descriptions for each of the positions, a glossary, and links to other Elections Canada tools like videos, training materials, and more information about key positions as well. Again, you can find all this information at inspiredemocracy.ca. So if you've ever thought about working at a federal election, if you ever have actually worked at a federal election, this map can still help you, because we recognize that people are at different journey, that people are at different points in their journey. And you might have worked as a poll worker, but now you're considering other jobs that might be available. Well, this is a good place to start. The fixed date for the next general election is on October 21st, 2019. It may be before that, but a federal election has to be held by this date. And that can always change, because it's the government that would call an election. But nonetheless, that's the date that's in the legislation for the next federal event. And that means that leading up to this date, Elections Canada will need to hire 285,000 people to make sure that the election runs smoothly. That's a lot of people to hire. Elections Canada is always looking for people who will support the election, and there are some ridings where it's not a problem for the returning officer to recruit people, but there are also many instances in which there are shortages. So 285,000 people to make that day happen, as well as We know that there's advanced polls, there are campus voting locations that will open, and there are also positions that will open at Elections Canada offices near you. So there is a wide range of roles and opportunities for you to work throughout the election period. Returning officers are responsible for running elections in their riding. So in Canada, there would be 338 ridings. That means that every riding has one returning officer, and that returning officer hires all the election workers for that riding. They look for workers who have skills to do the jobs based on the posters that we'll browse through in a minute, and they look for workers who will also reflect the diversity of their communities. And this election, we are trying really, really hard to make sure that youth, students, people who speak language other than the official language in their electoral district, as well as First Nations people, Métis or Inuit, and people with disabilities, all have the information they need to apply to those jobs, because we want the polls to reflect the diversity of the country, and certainly the diversity within every riding. And so if you are from one of those groups who face barriers, we want you to definitely consider applying, and definitely apply. And we'll go through the process in a minute. But again, youth, students, if you speak another language, including sign language, if you speak another language other than English or French, if you are from, if you are from the community of persons with disabilities, First Nations, Métis or Inuit, definitely apply. Okay, so let's go into some of the steps along the journey of this journey map that I'm telling you about. Some of you might be at a point where you're wondering, well, why work at a federal election? And there are several reasons. Number one being that it helps Canada's democracy. When you work at a federal election, you have the chance to make voting more welcoming and accessible to your community. By being a friendly face of the polling station or Elections Canada office, you help other people feel comfortable and confident when they vote. We also know that from an accessibility perspective, there are different physical, informational, attitudinal barriers that might prevent people from voting. And so for us to engage with people from different communities allows us to have people who are aware of the different barriers that people might face. And in doing so, you make the polling station more welcoming to people from diverse communities as well. Another reason is that you meet people in your community, and you'll meet your coworkers and people in your community, not only because they might be working, but also because they might come in to vote where you're assigned. And you also learn new skills. You'll get work experience, which can add to your resume. You'll also learn more about elections and how they work, which can also help you in other areas. We often hear from youth that they're looking for opportunities to develop their skills. And so this time around, 16-year-olds will be allowed to be hired. That is a recent change. Before that wasn't in the legislation, whereas now it is. And to do all this, you get paid to do it. You get paid for working at a federal election, as well as for attending the training sessions. All right, so in case you're not convinced, we also have lots of other reasons why it's beneficial for people to get involved. Again, inspireddemocracy.ca. The toolkit is under ACT. And there's another list of benefits as to why you might want to get involved in the democratic process in this way. One of the barriers that we found is people say, well, I don't know how elections work. I don't know much about elections, and so I'm not sure if I want to get involved. And I want to reassure you that every election worker who works at a polling station gets 3 hours of in-person training. Your job will be clearly explained to you. You'll know exactly what you need to do. There are always people who are ready to support you. Again, this is a team environment. There are different people with different roles. There are some people who are very experienced who come back election after election to work at the polls. And of course, there's always Elections Canada. And our training is such that I'll show you some video, one video in particular, so you can see the type of support that was offered for the last general election, and certainly the type of support that would be available to you this time around as well. So right now I'm on the Elections Canada website. Under Employment, you'll see that there's a tab, and I clicked on Training Videos, and we'll just take a look at the type of support that's available for people who might be who may be less confident because they don't know how elections work.
Election officers are the backbone of Canadian democracy. Each has an important role to play. The returning officer is appointed by Elections Canada and is responsible for organizing the election in the electoral district. The returning officer sets up an office in the district and rents all polling places. The returning officer also hires and supervises office staff and election officers who will work at each polling place. The information officer's main function is to greet and direct electors. The registration officer checks with electors to vote and prepares certificates before sending electors to their polling station. At the polling station, the deputy returning officer checks that all electors have proof of identity and address, authorizes any certificates, administers any required oaths, and issues ballots to electors. The poll clerk sits next to the deputy returning officer, confirms that electors are on the list, helps complete any required certificates and forms, records any oaths taken, and marks electors as having voted. The central poll supervisor oversees the polling place to make sure all elections officers carry out procedures properly. They are the main point of contact for candidates and their representatives, and are also responsible for making sure the polling place is accessible and resolving problems. They are the returning officer's eyes and ears at the polling place. When there is no central poll supervisor, a deputy returning officer is designated to take on these responsibilities.
Okay, so why did I show you the video? Number one, just to show you that there is training provided. So if ever you feel like not knowing much about elections is a barrier to you, there is training available, and it's also paid training. The first video is on your screen right now is about roles at the polling place versus the other video, which shows you a bit about voting in Canada and how it works. Again, to instill confidence in the workers that that helps in the running of the election, because if you have the context as to how it all works, it will also help you in performing your duties. So if you want to learn more about federal elections, go to the Elections Canada website, but also the Library of Parliament has really good resources where you can also learn about some basics about federal elections as well. Okay, next let's talk about who can work at a federal election. So now you're saying, okay, yeah, I'm ready, I want to do it, but there are a couple things that you need to know. First of all, you need to be a Canadian citizen. Canadian citizenship is not required to work in every role at an Elections Canada office in your riding, but it is a requirement for certain positions. So make sure that you check the application, and again, that's explained in the toolkit at inspiredemocracy.ca. The minimum age is 16 years old, as I said, and you also need to agree to be impartial while working at the federal election. Let me explain more about being impartial. Being impartial means that when hired, you sign a solemn declaration. That's like an oath, and it's to make your to make sure that that your impartiality is official when performing your duties. And in doing so, you agree to refrain from taking part in any political activities from the beginning until the end of your work for Elections Canada, working for any candidate or political party, or go to any political events or meetings. While you're on duty, you can't show or wear material that says anything good or bad about a political party or candidate, and the strict impartiality also applies to polling day as well, where even wearing something of a color of a certain party is also prevented. And this is important because nonpartisanship is a key to the process, and it strengthens the confidence of electors in knowing that the election is being managed in a fair and nonpartisan way. And there are also several people who cannot work for an election. So if you're a federal minister or a member of the Executive Council of a province, if you're a member of the Senate or the House of Commons, or if you have, if there's an offense against the Canada Elections Act in your records, you can't work at an election. And if you've served in Parliament in the session immediately before the election or the session in progress at the time of the election, these are just some indications. So go to the toolkit, the full list is there, and you can see for yourself. But that list really is if you've held if you've held office during a certain period of time, and so on. But for the general population, the list is quite short. If you meet those 3 requirements, generally, I would say you can work at an election. But do look at the exceptions. Okay. Next question that people seem to ask themselves is, do I need to be a member of a political party? The answer is no. But there's a reason why people ask this question. Until recently, political parties actually gave returning officers a list of potential election workers for their riding. But since the last federal election in 2015, the rules have changed. You don't need to have any connections to a political party to work at an election. When you're working as an election worker, however, you cannot participate in partisan activities, whether you're a member of a political party or not. So, like I said, in the past, it used to be that parties were given names and they were given a priority, but that is not the case for the next election. If you're a member of a political party, keep in mind that in the past, the returning officer had to wait for political parties to give them a list of potential election workers before they could actually start hiring. But now returning officers can hire 50% of election workers before political parties can suggest names. So parties can still suggest names, but returning officers can now hire anybody regardless. Okay, so let's talk about the kinds of jobs that are available, because I'm sure that that is a topic that will interest many of you. Different jobs are available depending on where and when you want to work. There are many different ways to work at a federal election, so look at the descriptions and see what best suits you. The various job types depend on whether you're working at an Elections Canada office, at a polling station, at an office on a college, university, or polytechnic campus. And as I said, each job has its own roles and requirements, but they will all give you valuable experience. They have competitive pay, and the skills and networking opportunities all exist across the board. So let's talk about jobs at Elections Canada offices. Every riding, as I said, is called an electoral district, and in Canada, every riding has an office that opens during an election or a by-election, and the returning officer for a riding works at Elections Canada, at this Elections Canada office, along with the workers who help to plan, manage budgets, resources, revise electoral lists, communicate with the public. And when you work at an Elections Canada office, you work for the entire election period. So that can be anywhere between 36 to 50 days before an election, and between 7.5 to 12 hours a day, including weekends. The office is a busy place during an election period, and election workers prepare everything people need to easily vote. So they register and update electors' names and addresses in the list of electors. They help electors to vote by special ballot. That's when you write in the name of your candidate before advance polls even. And they manage all the paperwork. They manage all the questions and answers that come from the public as well. Because the public is, if they have any questions, they're encouraged to go to their electoral district office, to the Elections Canada office in the riding. And so it is very busy, and people are going in and out, people are going in to vote, people are going in to register, and it's that kind of environment. And remember, the period is very short. It's anywhere between 36 to 50 days, and so there's a lot of work to do during that time. These jobs are about getting the election organized ahead of time. And so you would need a longer time commitment. Your job could start several weeks before election day. And these offices, like I said, will be open for long hours, up to 12 hours each day during the election. The Community Relations Officer Program is a key part of Elections Canada's outreach activities, and the goal is to engage with groups of people who vote less than others, such as youth, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, seniors, minority official languages, and different ethnocultural communities, electors with disabilities, and electors who are homeless. I will share information with Chris and the CHHA to make sure that if there is any interest, they'll have the information to point you in the right direction about the Community Relations Officer. You can also find a mini poster about this. Okay. All right. So jobs at polling stations. That's another category. And these are election workers who work at polling station. They work directly with the public. When you work at a polling station, you work either on election day or advance polls, or both. And advance polls, that's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, 1 week before the election. On election day, the shifts begin up to an hour before polls open and ends when election workers have counted the last ballots. So that's usually 12 to 14 hours or more later. When you work at a polling station, you work closely with the public, like I said. So polling stations can be busy at times, but again, you'll have a team working with you. It's a whole team that make it happen, both at your polling station and in some cases within the context of the riding. What can you expect when you work at polling stations? Each job is about helping people to vote or to register. There is a shorter time commitment. Your job will take place on election day or the 4 advanced polling days. And advanced polling days start 10 days before election day. And the polling station the polling station is open between 12 hours on election day and 12 hours per day on advanced polling days. But poll workers may work up to 14 hours during those days. So again, just trying to manage expectations about the different roles so that you know what to expect if you decide to apply to these positions and are successful in working during the election. From the information officer, who directs electors to the appropriate table, to the deputy returning officer who handles the ballot, election workers at polling stations make it possible for electors to vote in an orderly way. And there are 5 different positions at a polling station. Again, There are mini posters for each position. So I'll show you if I have time. Otherwise, inspiredemocracy.ca is where you'll find this information. So there is the deputy returning officer, the poll clerk, the information officer, the registration officer, and the central poll supervisor. Why don't I just take a moment to show you, because it might be easier if you see it and you're able to recognize it later on. So what I'm doing right now is going to inspiredemocracy.ca. I will click on English. As I said, you click on Act. And then the toolkit is working at a federal election. There are different toolkits on the screen, but the one we're talking about today is working at a federal election. As I showed you, there is a roadmap that is on the site. And right here, right below the map, sorry, I'll show you for context, we have the mini posters. And so let's take one, you'll see it's for Elections Canada office workers, polling station workers. That's where we're at right now. So let's try the deputy returning officer. You'll see what the key activities are. So the key activities, I'll make my screen larger, for the deputy returning officer are on the mini poster. It's oversees voting within a specific polling station, ensures that the poll clerk and candidates representatives follow the rules and procedures. They administer oaths. They maintain peace and good order within a specific polling station. And you'll also get right below an outline of what the pay is. So per advanced polls, we said that was 4 days of commitment. That's $708.40. And on election day, it's $247.94. And that does not include the training. All right, let's return to the presentation. Apologies for scrolling through all the slides. Okay, so we're caught up now. All right, so the next set of categories for jobs is on-campus voting offices. And for the 43rd election, that's the one coming up, we have over 115 college, university, and polytechnic campuses across Canada. They will be hosting vote on campus offices during the next election period, and these offices will be open for 5 days, from Saturday to Wednesday, 2 weeks before the election. When you work at a vote on campus office, you provide information, registration, and voting services to all electors, even if they're not students, and even if they don't live in the riding where they're working, because vote on campus is open to all eligible voters, that is. And most on-campus jobs, like I said, they're open they apply for, on-campus jobs happen over 5 days, and the offices are usually open between for up to 12.5 hours on the weekdays, and for 5 to 6 hours on the weekends. This is a shorter time commitment as well. Your job starts 16 days before the election day and lasts between 5 and 11 days. And some positions might last longer, but there are different types of roles as well. So look at the mini posters. Again, as I showed you, they are all laid out, and based on what based on the commitment that you can give, you can find something that that meets your needs. You can likely find something that meets your needs. So that's an example of the posters that we saw. I should mention that for some positions, it's an hourly rate. So for poll workers, it is a lump sum, but for some positions, such as the positions for campus employees or the people at the Elections Canada office, it is an hourly rate. Okay, so now you're all interested and you're actually thinking, okay, how's that, oh, sorry. Before we're there, let's talk about hiring and training. Like I said, election workers are hired and by the returning officer, and who works very closely with our recruitment officer. And usually you'll have a phone interview, after which you'll be assigned to a training session. So potential workers can apply in the appropriate employment section at Elections Canada website. Let's go over what that looks like right now. How do I apply? So if your interview is successful, the recruitment officer assigns you to a training session, and then after the training session, you have to sign a solemn declaration, and you're officially hired to work. Sorry, that was part of the last slide. My apologies here. So you'll be administered an oath, and then the returning officer evaluates how well you're doing, both during the training and on the job session as well. All right, let's get to how you apply. So how you apply depends on where you want to work. Check the employment section on the Elections Canada website and click on here. Let me show you. Click here. Let me show you. So I'm back at the Elections Canada website. This is what it looks like. This is the home screen. You'll click on employment, which is the icon lighting up right now as red. For jobs at Elections Canada offices, it's a bit different. So you'll see a series of jobs here. But I'll explain that to you in a second. So right here, we see poll workers. You'll see the Apply Now button. We see Elections Canada offices, so that's administrative staff. I told you, the administrative staff I told you about, where it's a 36-day calendar. If you happen to be in the National Capital Region, there's also positions that open up at our headquarters because our team significantly increases as well during that time. And of course, if you're looking for a job as a field liaison officer or even a returning officer, that's available. But our focus here today is really on poll workers and administrative staff in local elections. I want to clarify that for jobs at Elections Canada offices, you'll only see some listed here. And the reason that is because, like I said, it's the returning officer in each riding that would recruit and train and hire those who work within the offices. So what you can do is call Elections Canada, because the information for returning officers is not public right now. Because returning officers only open their offices once an election's called, they have contact information, but it's not public. But we can help you. In any case, get in touch with the returning officer so that you can express interest in the office jobs. Nonetheless, there are some here, because in some electoral districts, there are specific openings right now, meaning the returning officer might be having a hard time recruiting someone for that position. As I said to you, it's a lot to recruit 285,000 people. And so in some cases, they need extra help. And so we help them with advertising. And so you can see right now, Sault Ste. Marie seems to be a place where the returning officer is looking for help. I'm going to click on the Apply as a Poll Worker because there's something I would like to highlight. So when you're applying, you have to enter your postal code. I'll enter one that is for downtown Ottawa. In Ottawa Vanier. So I entered a postal code. It took me to this screen. And they ask you a series of questions that you have to answer. Am I at least 16 years old? Am I a Canadian citizen? And this is, you do that, you follow that process. Then you identify what official languages you speak. Am I bilingual in French and English? You click it. If you speak any other languages, indicate it. If you speak sign language, do indicate it. If you prefer corresponding in English or French, check that. Then your contact information, make sure you enter that. Then it'll ask you for your the position that you're applying for. Talk about your experience, and then there's a key section right here, right after you talk about your experience, where we ask about your accessibility needs. And like I said, in connecting with organizations of electors who face barriers, we keep saying that we want the polling station, we want Elections Canada offices to reflect the diversity of the communities. And so in asking for your accessibility needs, that is directly related to accommodations. So the question after that is, okay, so you do have accessibility needs, how can we accommodate your needs? So do share that information and do speak with your returning officer and your recruitment officer to let them know if you have certain accessibility needs. And then there are several other questions. And that is, in a nutshell, the process for working, for the application process. We will share this information with the CHHA so that they can make it available. This is how to apply for campus offices. We went through that. And again, this is the Inspire Democracy website. So I am open for questions now. If any of you want more details, also know that we'll point you to the right information afterwards. We'll send you some information about all that we shared today, where to apply if you're having specific difficulties with the system, or for some reason navigating it isn't as clear as we had hoped. Do let us know, and do let me know now, and I will do my best to answer your questions.
Thank you, John. You might want to push mute while I ask the question so there's no feedback. Perfect. Thank you for that. We do have a number of questions from people right across the country. So I will start with Carol from Quebec. She asked, do you need to be bilingual to work at the polling station or for any of the other positions?
There are certain positions that do, but in general, in some, so no, let me answer that again. No, you don't need to be bilingual. For some areas, it's actually quite difficult to find people who are bilingual, but the returning officer does have it in its mandate to find at least one bilingual person in certain electoral districts. In some areas, it's certainly an asset because you'll be dealing with people in both official languages. In certain areas where the predominant language is English or French, then there wouldn't be that requirement necessarily. It's up to the returning officer to make sure that if an elector does walk in, there is somebody who can help them. But go ahead and apply if you are unilingual.
Thank you for that. Another question I have from Marilyn from Regina is, what was the driving factor for Elections Canada to do this Inspire Democracy project? I think it's a great idea, and I want to commend you for being so inclusive in this election.
So that's a great question. Inspire Democracy is a program designed to make sure that people can exercise their their right to vote. It's a right to vote, and so we want to make sure that a lack of information isn't preventing somebody from participating in elections. Similarly to making sure that somebody who wants to run in an election, again, it's a democratic right, and so if it's a right, then we want to make sure that you have the information that you need to exercise that right.
Thank you. Alan from BC asked, if I'm successful to be chosen to work at a polling station, will my hearing loss be accommodated at the training sessions?
Speak to your returning officer, but yes, the expectation is that returning officers will accommodate needs as per electors communicating that need. Sorry, by electors, I mean candidates, so employees. So you need to communicate what your needs are and how you can be accommodated.
Thank you. Joan from Saskatchewan says, I'm attending the webinar and I want to thank you for having the videos captioned on your website. I'm also happy to see this webinar captioned as well. It really helps. I think that was more of a comment. We also have a question from Betty from Ottawa. She says, I'm attending the webinar and want to know why hard of hearing people seem to be forgotten in candidate meetings. How do we get access?
So that is another aspect of what we do in terms of accessibility. And as far as candidates, there is nothing that allows us to like the legislation doesn't prescribe what they need to do to make their meetings and campaigns accessible. But then again, we do provide some guidance to them as to how they can make their meetings more accessible to all Canadians. And again, with the focus of these are prospective electors, you may want to benefit from their vote, and so this is how you do it. And so we provide guidance to candidates and parties on that.
Thank you. I also have a question. Said you mentioned there will be training for people for 3 hours. Is the training at a specific time on a specific day, or can you schedule a time that is available for you?
It really depends on the position. Some positions are self-directed, self-guided. You do it online, watch the video, do the exercises. Other trainings will be in classroom training, and so the returning officer would have a variety of times when those would be available to make sure that people are accommodated. And from my understanding, they have several training sessions. So I would hope that you would find the time, or that the returning officer would work with you and the recruitment officer and the training officer to ensure that the training needs are met.
Another question we have is, will you only be posted for a job in your riding? I could travel to a neighborhood area as well. Bill from Calgary.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Sorry. The person asked, are you only able to, will you only be posted for a job in your riding? This person indicates that they could travel to a neighborhood area as well.
So because there are usually issues in recruiting the right number of people, actually this time around, and that's new in the law, returning officers can recruit from neighboring districts. So first they have to try to get people in their own district, but if they can't, they are certainly allowed, and we encourage them to seek people from neighboring districts.
Another question we have from a long-time standing member is that they're concerned by CHHA holding these types of programs, that we can lose our charitable status for having these type of webinars or promoting information about elections. What are your thoughts about that, Juan, and what are the guidelines for such activities?
So the information that we share is entirely nonpartisan. We don't even take positions on issues. That is not our job. Our job is to just communicate with electors and organizations. At least my role is to connect with organizations so that they can help us, because Inspired Democracy works in a way that we hear from the different communities about their needs. And so the role of the Inspired Democracy team and outreach team at Elections Canada is to take that knowledge and to improve the electoral process. Once we've improved the electoral process and worked together to remove some of the barriers, then we need to work with these organizations to help us transmit that message. And it's as simple as that, to say, okay, so community, I'll give you another example. There's a community in a remote area where, an Indigenous community where ID is an issue, and not everyone has IDs, or even within the disability community, people who have who don't necessarily have a driver's license, but they do have certain types of IDs that can help them to cast their vote. And so, in working with different organizations, we can then transmit that message. This is the issue that you raised, and this is how we fixed it. And so don't let that prevent you from casting your vote. And it's all about the electoral process.
We have two more questions. Do I call Elections Canada to apply for a job? I don't have any experience. Does that matter, Robert?
It doesn't matter if you don't have any experience. You can either contact Elections Canada if you're looking for specific jobs. If you are looking to look at some of the roles that we looked at today, you can go on the website and apply. And also, once the list of returning officers is made public, you can contact your local office, or you can go into the office and tell the returning officer that's what you want to do. You can also fill out your application there in person, or make that personal contact with the returning officer and express that interest. And like I said, there is a shortage of elections workers, and so if you express interest, there is a training program in place where you can get the skills that you need, and where you can get the training that you need to do the job.
Thank you. We have another of other questions that have been addressed today as well, but I think they are more applicable for our next webinar we'll be having in September about accommodations and accessibility during the election. I want to again to thank you for coming in today and speaking to our membership and people throughout Canada to talk about employment during the upcoming election. And I would like to thank everyone for participating in all your questions. Just a reminder, this session was recorded and will be available for playback on our website. Thank you again and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.